Last year's Magia Record came and went with little fanfare. As someone who recently revisited the series, I decided to watch Record for the first time, and as my title would suggest, I found it to be another brilliant showing of anime industry talent from the now infamous Studio Shaft, but as a narrative to be ultimately held back by its mobile game source. Let's breeze past the spoiler-free section first. The story. This is definitely the show's weaker area, though not to the extent some have implied. If you know anything of my other work, I judge all media by its individual merit. However, if you compare Record to its parent show, you will be disappointed. This is in large part because the two shows aim for alternative methods. Where Madoka is a deliberate deconstruction of the magical girl genre, taking a more pragmatic look at each of the field's many facets, Record, while having some of those elements, is far more akin to a traditional magical girl show, with far fewer casualties and a greater focus on the teamwork elements of the genre. This is not by itself an inherently bad thing. I spoke to a degree in my Rebellion review about appreciating the idea of spin-off media, or OVAs dealing with a more light-hearted story within the Madoka verse, and this is almost that, almost. The biggest issue, without spoilers, comes from its attempt to be more like its older sibling. When the show strives to do its own exploration, then it comes across as a breath of fresh air and a mature understanding of what made the decade-old original great. There's a YouTube video I watched with a similar opinion to this by Abandoned Reviews. If you like this line of thinking, it's linked above. All told, the story is quite serviceable, but far from the standout narrative that was Madoka, and it's uncontent to stick to its own path, which is a shame. Characters. Like this story, the characters are by no means bad, oftentimes endearing, but wholly too shallow. This is, to be fair, an issue with the original, and to give credit where it's due, it's more an aspect of this style of storytelling rather than a fault. Let me explain. In the original, you have Mami and Kyoko, whom are both used fairly sparingly. However, through great visual characterization and stolid story writing weaved into their teams and that of the shows, both of them have managed to become highly iconic and beloved characters within the various anime communities. Record attempts to mimic the same, giving characters striking appearances and sparse backstory. However, it doesn't work quite as well. While the characterization is nearly as strong as the originals, it falls flat due to the story, quite simply. We don't see enough of these characters to really get a proper feel for them. The strength of Madoka's method for doing this was in its small primary cast, which is never bigger than 4 members at a time. It wouldn't be till the 5th film, or the 3rd film, that all 5 girls were on screen together. However, while Record also has a team of 5, it's got a plethora of other magical girls to give screen time to. Mind you, this could still work, but as mentioned, the story leaves many of them wanting more. They're by no means bad characters, and their simple aesthetic and personalities make them likeable enough in a moe kind of way, but they land far short of their OG counterparts. The music and animation. With returning composer Yuki Kajura, the OST is unsurprisingly a marvel once more. I've heard some suppose it doesn't quite reach the heights of its predecessor, and that's definitely a fair reading. However, from the intro to the battle theme and the bonus vocal tracks by Riri Graphics, there's a lot of good in here that has it standing far above almost any other soundtrack from its respective aired season. The animation falls into the same category. It's great to re-experience the world and its psychedelic visuals once more. Some of the witches are a little less inspired, but all in all, you'll get your fix of mesmerising eye candy. My favourite sequence being that of when Sana visits her home after her initial arc and appearance. I also quite like or appreciate the stylistic references to the likes of Revolutionary Girl Utena, especially in the rumour sequences. In terms of fights, the first against the wings of the Magius and the final fight in episode 13 stand out on top in terms of fight choreography. Contrastingly, and while I'd like to view Record separately, I'd be remiss not to mention that many of the fights feel clunky and fail to match those of the original's flair. Nonetheless, Record, while not quite to the standard of its parent, is a fantastic looking and sounding anime, up there for the best of the year with these glorious production values that make even the story's weakest segments an entertaining viewing experience. And it's just nice to see a modern anime that doesn't use a homogenized style. Our spoiler-free journey, Record's first 2/3 are a thoroughly enjoyable romp into an alternative Madoka-verse. It's got restraint to not simply copy the original, and presents intriguing character threads and stunning production values. However, it loses its way severely in its final act, and fails to leave a satisfying aftertaste as it becomes bogged down in gritty details and poor references to the original show. Madoka fans and those of darker magical girl shows will most likely enjoy this one for the ride that it is, and while it may disappoint some looking for a repeat of the first story, I think it is worth giving a watch, doubly so once the sequel finishes up. A 6.5 out of 10. Spoilers ahoy. Speaking of poor references, one of the show's most egregious must certainly be Sayaka. Her inclusion comes with her third ever fire extinguisher diversionary trope. And while this might make some smile, off the back of Rebellion it feels exceedingly like hollow pandering. As we're here, let's talk about the use of the old magical girls for a moment. As stated above, I find one of Record's weakest characteristics to be the inclusion of these classic characters. It reminds me strongly of how the second seasons of most Gundam anime end up overshadowing their new cast members with increasingly regular cameos from the first series cast. I'm looking at you most of all, Gundam Seek Destiny. It's a method I've seldom, if ever, seen pulled off in a satisfying light, and that's unfortunately the case here too. Kyoko, I'm rather happy to say, fares the best in this regard, as she's solely used to illustrate a similar worldview between herself and Felicia, while reminding us that she's called a veteran magical girl for a reason, with one of the two great fight scenes I mentioned earlier. And she acts in character for her whole time on screen. Her inclusion is fairly unneeded, however it's relatively harmless and welcome fan service that does serve some function to the story and characters. On the other hand, we have Mami and Sayaka, who fare much worse. Mami at first seems to be going the same route as Kyoko, being used to illustrate elements of Yachio's character. However, by the show's close, this quickly goes south. It's not that her joining the wings of the Magias is out of character, but that her motives for doing so become rapidly clouded by ever-collapsing world-building. Furthermore, the degree to which she's under some form of mind control is really unclear, giving her a lack of agency, further muddying her role as an antagonist in the story. Culminates in the show's final set piece, where we also get the reintroduction of Sayaka Miki. Her screen time is minimal but equally intrusive. What should have been the final fight of the series with the 5 girls fighting a greater foe becomes akin to a bullet hell mission between Mami and Sayaka with some minor assistance from Yachio, and that's about it. Again, I like this final fight on a technical and visual level, but narratively it's a complete disaster. How can it even be possible, for one thing? What series of events could occur so that Mami can not only live to see Sayaka and Madoka become magical girls, then spend literal weeks, if not longer, in a sister city, before even more enough time passes for Sayaka to track her down and be on a high enough level to take her on in combat? Now, to be fair, power scaling isn't something Madoka tends to care too much about, and I actually think that's one of its strengths, allowing for increasingly more interesting battles. Additionally, Miki does manage to sort of hold her own against Kyoko in the original TV show. However, the real problem is why. Why are we seeing this era now? What does it have to do with our story? This is what I mean when I reference the final act falling astray. We lose the square focus we had on our heroes for a meaningless, motiveless battle, but the stakes couldn't possibly be any less clear. The really sad thing is, this wouldn't be that hard to rectify. Allow me to armchair offer for a moment. If you simply changed the battle to be between our 5 heroes and Doppelmami, then this would serve as an actual climax for the first series story. A story about building a team, a found family. Sure, it wouldn't make the show perfect, the motives of the baddies would still be too vague, and personally I'd probably remove the use of our heroes, using or even understanding what the Doppels are. But it would be more in line with what the story had been so far, and a far better use of Mami, as it would show how our new cast intends to move past the old, not repeating their mistakes. The fact is, for me the biggest letdown was never getting the fight scene from the opening song. You know, the bit where the 5 girls of the boarding house do a sort of roll call, each displaying their signature weapon. Well, that fight never happens, and it really hampers the group dynamic. Sure, decent time is spent having them bond, and that is much appreciated. But when Yachio says she's disbanding the band, you quickly realise there isn't a group to break up. Having Yachan's mini-arc end with all 5 fighting alongside one another again, her restored trust as it were, would have worked to rectify this. But alas, we'll never get to see it, as 3 members of the core cast are literally kidnapped off our screens with no real inclusion in the finale. Reminder of the good. Before we get too bogged down in the negatives, I'd like to reinforce the fact that I actually do enjoy this show. Once more, I find the production brilliant, and the characters, their designs in particular, to be very charming and mostly creative. Other things I enjoyed were the animations for both the intro and outro. The intro in particular references the original show's opening far better than much of the actual story references. And the outro is animated, which is always a win in my book by itself, but it also gives us some more of Yachio's frame of mind earlier on, which is nice and just a good use of the outro. To agree further with some of other positive reviews I've read and watched, I too love how episode 3 is not what everyone expected it to be, and instead the show tries to, for the most part, stray away from repeating any of Madoka's shock value events. I also agree that the idea of explaining the process of magical girls turning into witches through a condescending lecture is an inspired one. I especially like how they parrot a slightly paraphrased version of QB's iconic line about how we call developing women girls, ergo we call young witches magical girls. It's a neat diversion of our expectations. Finally, I think Iroha is actually a decent protagonist. She's a little blank, but it's nice to see that she starts as a small-town magical girl at the series' onset, and her motivation is the driving force of the early parts of the show. It should also be said that while her ploy to get back her lost sister Yui hasn't gone very far within the first series, she does develop somewhat, clearly becoming more comfortable in her own skin, more determined to find Yui, and takes it upon herself to be Yachan's friend of her own volition. She is by no means bad if put in a vacuum separate to the world building. Unfortunately, I think it's time we address that properly. The world building, or lack thereof. Like I mentioned with power scaling before, world building is both one of Madoka's most enchanting factors, but also one of its loosest. The original series opted to leave many details vague, like that of its level of technology, which was seemingly far beyond anything of our real-world timeline. Details such as how any of the magical girls like Mami or Kyoko could last so long, when the likes of Sayaka broke apart in a matter of weeks, or just how old Homura actually is mentally, were always left deliberately untold. This does give Record some leeway. The mobiles and apps those phones pertain are more than acceptable in a world of this technology, even if it is strange seeing a 2011 setting where everyone sees or seems to use a modern-day online chat app. However, because of the increased number of magical girls, those cracks in the original world from long ago seem to grow existentially. You end up leaving the show with mountains of unanswered, seemingly basic and innocuous questions. For example, what is a veteran? I earlier called Kyoko one, however that's not actually how the show paints her. In fact, it only really paints Mami and Yachio as vets, and Mifu, presumably by association to Yachio? The question becomes, what is a veteran? Simply a strong magical girl? A leader, or one who's been going for a long time? By rights, Momoko and Surano should also be classified this way, yet despite how prominent a detail it is for Mami and Yachan in forming a lot of their characters, it's never mentioned in relation to other long-standing magical girls. How exactly do the girls divide up territory? Sure, there's a lot of witches, but by the show's end, there appears to be literally hundreds of magical girls in the city. So how, where, and why? What about the town Iroha was from? Is the incredibly lazy named girl in monochrome Kuroe meaning black, still defending it alone? How long had Ira known Kuroe? She says only a day or two, but they fight like old friends. I believe she may even cameo under a hood in episode 13, but that isn't much information. Have the witches completely vacated the rest of the world? Why does one witch kill a familiar at the end of episode 1? Has Iroha actually gotten any stronger by the end of episode 13? And in what way was she all that much weaker than the girls native to the city? Carryover questions from the mobile game. As many have rightfully pointed out, Madoka as a setting actually works quite well for these mechanics. The sync attacks characters can do doesn't feel out of place at all. You wouldn't even notice them if you weren't thinking about it. But the doubles are immensely immersion-shattering, and barely explained to us in any meaningful way, despite their extreme relevance to the whole property and pretty much every episode of the anime after about 3 or 4. With the doubles in particular, I was greatly saddened, as in those early episodes, the idea that double came about as a partial witch transformation, with the fact that the respective girl's soul gem was still in one piece, meant that they could come back from the brink. It seemed like an interesting new take, very high risk but high reward. But what explanation we did get just makes it a boring gacha game power-up mechanic, with seemingly minimal consequences so far. The same can be said of the soul gem purification mechanic for making girls stronger, which only gets mentioned all of once and never again as far as I could tell. In fact, the whole idea of the magical girl refuge is a great one, especially the flavor text that implies they may even get donations of grief seeds from the stronger girls to get passed down to the weaker ones. But again, it raises questions and doesn't really go anywhere. Again, some of this stuff is great but poorly explored. We have the idea that the magical girls don't age, finally getting confirmed on screen, and the thought that Yachio is somewhere in her late 20s or 30s is great. It further helps clear up a theory many of us had from the original, like how Homura still looks 14 despite her time travel shenanigans, or why Kyoko, 16, looks far younger. However, it once more falls short by not actually doing anything with this information. Sure, it's great that Yachio once mentions liking shopping sales. It's cute even, and she has a job. But we never get to learn or have a proper conversation between her and Momose, discussing the crushing reality that none of them are aging, or that if they are doing so, it's at a greatly reduced rate. Maybe they could discuss the idea of forcefully changing their appearances, like we sort of see in the McDonald's scene. Or maybe actual weight loss or height gain possibilities for the characters to grapple with. It's a terribly wasted opportunity for some really great character depth that gets completely squandered. Another is the fact 4 of our gang fight the witch from episode 1 in the original anime to recover some coasters, which is a great reference to how all the witches are coming to the city and therefore never fight Mami elsewhere, except its placement makes no sense. I'm not too fussed about timelines, but Record seems intent on pushing just how far I'll tolerate on that particular front. Thoughts. Is Iroha a protagonist? As I don't have much in the way of unique takes to say on the actual plot of the story, I've mostly abstained from doing so, but as we near the end of our review, I find myself compelled to air a final grievance. Record operates like an anthology series, and while it manages not to go too overboard on the size of its cast like so many other gacha game compatriots have before it, it still has a lot of characters and stories it wants to get through. We see these through the eyes of Iroha, and while I agree that getting to see each magical girl's teens living their normal daily lives, like going for fast food, having petty fallings out with one another, and buying colour-coded mugs for their shared home, it oftentimes feels like Iroha is a third wheel to the story she's experiencing. I don't mind the likes of Momoka comes to rely on her markedly fast, as it seems likely that more tolerant magical girls will take allies wherever they can find them. But for the most part, about half of the stories could function without the inclusion of Iroha. She's superfluous. Now again, I'll state that this could work, and in a show like Shuffle, I love how the protagonist essentially does little to solve the problems of the people around him until later on in the story. Furthermore, I really do like Iroha, but it gives the story a wavy sort of feeling. To its credit, she reminds us of her quest just the right amount that we never forget, but not so much that it gets annoying. In fact, it's all kind of working until the final act. Had the show remained fairly anthological with the vague goal of tracking down clues about Yui and the primary focus on building a found family, then I really think this could have worked. But as already mentioned and discussed, the more the plot broadens in scope into a battle against a secret cabal of evil magical girls, the weaker and less fun it gets. I mean, why exactly are we fighting the wings of Magius? Sure, Mami goes a bit loopy, but that's only at the very end. Are we fighting them because they're Mephitarm civilians? If that's the case, surely the fact it's hinted they're going to face down Walpurga schnocked means they'll actually save more people in the grand scheme of things. In the end, there's more missed potential. The wings are constantly painted as the bad guys, and any chance of them being a nuanced enemy with an ends justify the means mentality is thrown away when they literally start brainwashing people in the final 2 episodes. It's once more a really great shame. To conclude, I really do like Record. I enjoyed it a whole lot. It's a good show to binge over a couple of days, and I don't normally advocate much in the way of binge watching. And the dub's good enough. It's not mind-blowing, as there isn't really enough big moments for the voice actors, sub or dub, to properly stretch their vocal cords. However, all the VAs do a good job, and Kyoko was once again my favourite performance, even without any moments to show her range, like trying to rescue Sayaka in the original. Furthermore, it's really great and much appreciated that all the old voice actors came back. Just a shame they don't get better material. However, its split focus and ending that isn't just open but is gaping wide mars what is otherwise a gripping production that could have been the best gacha game adaptation ever made if treated differently. Whatever the case, I'll still look forward to more simpler moments with Iroha and Yachan and the opportunity to finally get to see the 5 fight together as one in Series 2, which I may write a review of too if it's half decent. Hi, this is the end of the video. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and if you want, leave a like or a comment below. See you in the next one.